Hello, I'm David Soroka. This is number 0775, the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there. Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File program, number 0775. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File program, you'll meet John Guiver, who is the author of To Play the Game, A History of Flight 571. What made him interested in delving into the famous Andes air crash from 1972?
I had a lifelong interest in the story from reading the book Alive, but it was a trip to the Andes that really got me engaged with the story. So I went on an expedition to the site of the accident with one of the survivors, a guy called Eduardo Strauch. Through Eduardo, I met another survivor, a guy called Pedro Algorta. I translated his memoir, which had just come out, and I gradually got very much engaged with the community. I started meeting not only the survivors, but also the families of those who had died on the mountain.
Momoko Uno is the author of 14 Days, a memoir of love, loss, and quarantine hell. It tells the story of when she went back to Australia to see her dying mother, but it was during the pandemic, and she almost died herself during a mandatory quarantine.
I've been a closet writer for a very, very long time, and during this 2-week government-mandated quarantine, I almost died while I was watching my mother pass away, and I realized at that moment of almost touching death that life was very short and that I wanted to overcome my fears of putting my writing out into the world. And so I decided to go for it. It's a memoir, so it was obviously true to my own story, so nobody could poo-hoo it.
Science writer Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy, is back to talk about another once-in-a-lifetime astronomical event this year. This time, we get to see an explosion on a distant star.
We are actually going to witness a stellar explosion. A star that, what's really cool is actually exploded already 3,000 years ago. It's a star that's 3,000 light years away that is going to go nova. It's a star that is going to have an explosion on its surface that will make it as bright as the North Star is visible to us. So we'll actually be able to see it with the naked eye. Even people within city limits, just with the naked eye, even with light pollution, we'll be able to see it.
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news, and of course, an idiot of the day. The guest later, the person who told you this was show number 0775, was David Soroka, plumber to the stars, and a dear friend, and someone, by the way, who I used to have on regularly on my old radio show. Thank you very much, David, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File program, a show that is listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. Here's a term you might not know. A cryptic pregnancy occurs when a woman is pregnant but doesn't realize it until labor begins. So it went for 26-year-old Tavia Woodfork of Mississippi, who experienced stomach pains just as she walked into a Golden Corral restaurant in North Little Rock, Arkansas on May the 6th.
There's something for everyone at Golden Corral.
Yeah, her something was a bouncing baby boy. Anyway, Woodfork went into the restroom where she delivered into the toilet 6-pound Tamar Kylon Corral Woodfork. Yes, that third name is a tribute to the restaurant. A Golden Corral shared news of the birth on their Facebook page and even gifted the new mom a $200 gift card, among other items. The family, who were dining and numbered 10 people, as the restaurant was the final stop of a family day at a theme park, was treated to a free meal at the restaurant, and staff gave Tavia a gift bag with baby essentials. Wait a minute. Tavia didn't get a meal. She was busy giving birth. Anyway, Golden Corral also sent a note and gift card a few weeks later.
For a limited time, every night on the dinner buffet. Golden Corral. Everyone deserves a good meal.
Yeah, and Tavia needs more gift cards. As part of the annual Italian Market Festival in Philadelphia, one contest involves competitors climbing a greased pole to claim bags of meat and cheese tied at the top. The festival was during the weekend of May 18th and 19th. This year, however, the dangling delectables were left hanging, and now it's mid-June, and they're still there. Festival organizers are trying to arrange for a crane to gather the leftovers, which visitors claim aren't stinky yet. But with the current heat dome across the United States, that might change.
What's that smell?
In Lakeland, Florida, on June 14th, customers in a McDonald's drive-thru were unhappy with an incorrect order. They argued with employee Chastity Gardner before starting to drive away. That's when Gardner allegedly threw a drink at the car. Two of the customers exited the car, opened the drive-thru window, and threw the drinks at Gardner, who grabbed a handgun and walked outside, firing at least one shot at the vehicle as it left the parking lot. She was arrested for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. So, this is a case where someone working at a drive-thru window took things a little too far. Technically speaking, this employee was the one who actually escalated things, and she used a gun, so I'm not really having any sympathy for her. On the other hand, here's another case. On June the 11th in Seattle, 23-year-old Emma Lee got into hot water with a drive-thru customer at Taste of Heaven Espresso, where she works, is the sole employee, and is the owner. The customer was steamed about the price of his drinks, to which Lee responded, "You don't get to name your own price." After receiving his drinks, the customer got out of his car, opened the lids, and threw them through the drive-thru window at the barista, then spit on her. But Lee fought back, probably saying to herself,
"You can't touch this."
She leaned out of the window and took a hammer to his windshield.
"Stop! Hammer time!"
Putting a hole in the glass.
"Break it down!"
Emma said the argument that he didn't know or was scammed doesn't hold up. The prices are listed. She also said,
"The police came. They got him to leave, right? It is understood that what happened is he assaulted me, and I responded."
Police were called, and Lee filed charges of misdemeanor assault and banned him from the store. You might be wondering why she even had a hammer. Well, she is a woman who is the sole proprietor of her coffee business. She has several hammers, some to repair stuff, and some to protect herself.
"Stop! Hammer time!"
You go, girl. Anyway, let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff All program, shall we? John Guiver is the author of To Play the Game, A History of Flight 571. It's the story of the 1972 Andes flight disaster, the survivors' 72 days on the mountain, their ordeal in surviving, their trek to freedom, and the parents' search for their lost children. John joins us via Zoom from the UK to talk about it. Hi, John.
Oh, Peter, thank you for having me on your show.
Thanks for being on the program with us. First of all, I think for those of us who are old enough to remember this situation, we all remember the story of the 1972 Andes flight. But what brought it to your attention to the point where you said, I've got to write this book and tell their story?
Well, I had a lifelong interest in the story from reading the book Alive, which came out in '74. But it was a trip to the Andes in 2013 that really got me engaged with the story. So I went on an expedition to the site of the accident with a mountaineer who led the expedition and one of the survivors, a guy called Eduardo Strauch. And that sort of opened the gateway for me really into that community. So through Eduardo, I met another survivor, a guy called Pedro Algorta. I translated his memoir, which had just come out. That was in 2016. And I gradually got very much engaged with the community. I started meeting not only the survivors, but also the families of those who had died on the mountain. Some of them, had stayed alive for quite a few days after the accident.
Now, you mentioned that you went on a tour. Has that become a thing where people go on tour to the site where this accident took place?
Yes, there's quite I can talk about it as a pilgrimage, really, of people every year. A lot of Argentinians and Uruguayans, but also people, from North America and from Europe. And there are quite a few expeditions now, so it's grown over the years. And you see hundreds of people actually in the summer months, really between January and March, going up there. And it's quite an iconic place, really, to visit.
Now, one of the things I think everyone remembers from this story is the fact that in order to survive, some of the people who were on that flight resorted to cannibalism. You've had the opportunity, as you say, to talk to not only the survivors, but you've talked to family members of those who passed away. What do they have to say about that particular aspect of it, especially the survivors?
Well, it's an extraordinary situation because let me just give a little bit of context here. So this was a First Division rugby team that were on this flight, but they came from a community where everyone knew everyone. So just to give you an idea of that, in 1960, sort of 10 years, 12 years before the accident, 26 out of the 40 passengers had gone to the same primary and secondary school. So they all knew each other and they all lived side by side. And the reaction of the parents of those who died was extraordinary. One person said, one of the fathers said, I knew from the first my son must have died, and I knew what they must have resorted to, and I'm happy that there were 40 passengers on the flight, so 16 families got their children back, and that was not an uncommon reaction. They were very supportive. One of the mothers said, it's their mission to help the survivors get over their ordeal, because obviously there was great psychological pressure on them after they came back due to the sensationalism of what they'd had to do.
Well, speaking of sensationalism, I'm just wondering, have you ever given thought to the fact that if we had, back in that day, in 1972, the polarizing social media that we have today, what do you think the fallout from this particular story would have been with social media the way it is today?
Well, I think, with any social media, right, it's very toxic. You get extreme views, and those views are the loudest. I think the community would have protected, the survivors from the worst excesses of that, as they indeed did from the press. Because the press were very, when they arrived back and when it became apparent what they'd done, there was some very vicious sort of attacks on their integrity, claiming that perhaps they, people hadn't died, that they'd been killed and so on. So there were those attacks then. They just were not as sort of widespread.
In talking to the survivors of the air disaster, did you recognize or hear any stories of, for lack of a better term, survivor's guilt?
Yes, there was very much a survivor's guilt. The guilt was not what they had to do. The guilt was that they had come back and they were living side by side with, parents and friends and brothers and sisters who had lost a loved one, and that was the real guilt. And it was because it was such a close-knit community. It was a very difficult thing to talk about. So I think they've come to terms with it, and especially in recent years, there's been, a much bigger connection between the families of those who died and the survivors themselves. But there was always somewhat of that, even from the beginning. They were still speaking to each other, but it was sort of best not really spoken about. So it wasn't it was something people avoided rather than speak about.
Well, since people didn't want to speak about it, can you give us an idea, percentage-wise, of the amount of people that you reached out to talk about this story and the percentage who would or would not talk?
Well, one of my goals was to speak to all the families of those who did not come back from the mountain. And I have 23 chapters of the book. So 23 out of the 29 people who died, I was able to speak to. And they were very kind, very generous with their time. They were very supportive. Some of those 6 that I wasn't able to get, it's just there wasn't a contact. They were crew members. And there were only a couple of cases where a family didn't really want to speak, to an outside person about it. So it was very supportive, really.
Okay, again, of course, we're talking about a team that went down, and I'm just curious to know, was there any trepidation on your part of titling this book To Play the Game, and why did you particularly pick that title?
Well, To Play the Game comes from a prayer that this was this rugby team. They'd all gone to the same school, but they'd become a very good rugby team, the Old Boys. And it was a school that was run by the Irish Christian Brothers, and they used rugby really as a sort of a model of life. The teamwork and the discipline and the respect. And the prayer that they had went like this: "It's all in this to play the game, to win or lose and be the same, to take the blame, to smile the while. Oh, help me, Lord, to play the game. For when the one great scorer comes to write against your name, he'll ask not if you won or lost, but how you played the game." So the reason I chose that title was because the people on the mountain, some of them lost and some of them won, and it was completely random depending on where they were sitting in the plane. But it was how the community reacted to this tragedy that really sort of struck me.
Do we know the numbers of how many people died upon impact, or how many people died in the wait to be rescued?
Well, so at the very right after the accident, there were still 33 people alive. By the end of the first night, so they were sort of huddled in this broken fuselage, there were 29 left. Of those 29, 8 died in an avalanche about 10 days, 2 weeks after the initial impact. And then there were a few people who died gradually of their injuries over the course of the 72 days. In the end, there were 16 left.
So, as you say, some people survived the accident and some people survived the avalanche as well?
Yes, so the avalanche came in, it was early evening. The plane was sort of tilted. So when the avalanche came in, there were some people who were on the side that was deeper, who were buried much more deeply than the other side. And there was one boy who just sort of leapt up at the time the avalanche came in, and he started uncovering people, and gradually there were more hands available to uncover more people. But 8 people died, and they were generally sitting in this sort of place where the snow was very deep.
In talking to the survivors, I mean, the question I would need to ask, especially considering it's a tight-knit group and from a religious community, at some point after the avalanche, they must be saying, God, what do you have planned for me? I mean, first the plane crash, then an avalanche. What next?
Well, yes, there was very much that feeling. So, there was a point about 8-9 days when they heard on the little transistor radio that the search had been called off. It wouldn't be resumed for another 3-4 months. And then that was sort of a call to action. And then there was this feeling, well, look, we've survived the plane crash, we've survived our injuries, we're going to survive. And then this avalanche came. And in retrospect, they felt, well, if those people hadn't died in the avalanche over the 72 days, there wouldn't have been enough food for the others to die. So, for some people, it was sort of, it was part of the survival story. But yes, there was very much a feeling of, we've survived the plane crash. We didn't think anyone else was going to die. And then later, when people started dying of their injuries, they got gangrene and so on, there was that feeling again. They thought, well, we've survived the avalanche, and now someone else has died. Where is this going to end?
It's a fascinating story, and I'm glad that you're bringing it to light yet again, especially with the insight from those involved that you get to share with your book. The book is called To Play the Game, A History of Flight 571. John, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
John Guiver, the author of To Play the Game, A History of Flight 571. You can go to my website at thestuffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0775, and you'll find links to John's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like, but the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/The Stuff File program. You're experiencing the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. Sit back, relax, let it rattle around between your ears, tickling your cerebellum, and enjoy.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk to Momoko Uno, who is the author of 14 Days, a memoir of love, loss, and quarantine hell. Plus, Andrew Fazekas, the night sky guy, will be along to talk about an exploding star. We also have an idiot of the day coming your way, and much more in Stuff File News right here, right now. State Representative Jim Carroll of Bennington, Vermont, released 2 videos to local news outlets in June depicting his colleague, Representative Mary Morrissey, pouring water into Carroll's tote bag as it hung on a hook in his office. The incidents took place in April. Said Morrissey, "I want to say how very, very sorry I am for my actions of pouring water in Jim Craig's tote bag. Quite honestly, I don't know why I did it. I was not meaning to hurt him." Carroll decided to release the video, which he took because he believed not doing so would draw even more attention to the events. Speaker of the House Jill Krowinski told Morrissey, who's been a member of the House since 1997, that she would no longer be eligible to serve on conference committees. Morrissey must have been a hoot back in grade school. Laurence van Wassenhove worked for France Telecom starting in 1993. France Telecom, which was later bought by Orange, knew of her physical limitations caused by medical conditions, so they tailored a secretarial job to fit her skills. In 2002, she asked to move to another region of France, and her request was approved, but the new workplace was not adapted for her needs. However, instead of making the necessary changes, Orange continued to pay her full salary for 20 years while she did nothing. A mediator was appointed in 2015 to resolve the situation, but nothing changed. Said Van Wassenhove, "Being paid at home, not working, is not a privilege. It's very hard to bear." She is suing Orange for moral harassment and discrimination at work linked to her health condition. Her lawyers believe Orange was trying to coerce her into quitting. Let me get this straight. She's been receiving her full salary for over 20 years without doing any work? If your company is trying to coerce you to quit and have been paying your salary for 2 decades, then they need a new plan. Yeah. Anyway, so here's a story that has me a bit confused. In October 2023, 57-year-old Wendy Munson was interrupted while teaching her second grade class at Nuestro Elementary School in Live Oak, California. Sutter County Sheriff's Office deputies arrested her. A coworker alleged she was teaching class while drunk, and security video showed she had driven to school that day. Blood alcohol tests showed Munson's blood alcohol was double the legal limit for driving, and she was charged with child endangerment and DUI. But when it came time to go to court, District Attorney Jennifer Dupree announced she was dropping charges against Munson. It turns out, she said, that it's not illegal to teach drunk in California. There's no law against it. Well, what of the DUI charge? Dupree responded with, there was the possibility that she drank after she arrived at the school. The DA could not prove otherwise. Also, the child endangerment law prohibits conduct that would endanger children, not may endanger children. Okay, so let me get this straight. Under the current child endangerment laws, bringing into school, say, a crossbow may endanger children, but it wouldn't necessarily endanger children even if the teacher was drunk. Okay, then perhaps the parents may want to have those laws changed. By the way, if you're wondering why I used the hypothetical example of bringing a crossbow to school, well, I was going to say gun, but we all know that guns are definitely not allowed in schools. The law is quite clear about that, and oh so successful. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our next guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, police say a bear got into 4 houses in Sierra Madre, California. At Lori DeVault's house, it entered through a screen door. She said, "It just opened the freezer and took my packaged chicken." Neither the bear nor any humans were injured in the escapade, and the bear, which police chased away, ultimately dropped the chicken, which the police returned. Said DeVault, "It was a very polite bear." If you're a bear, doing nothing worse than stealing chicken counts as polite. Also, since the bear had that chicken in its mouth, would you really want to cook that up again? Yeah. Anyway, let's get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Momoko Uno is a Doctor of Integrative Medicine, certified Functional Medicine Practitioner, Acupuncturist, and a board-certified Chinese Herbalist. She's also the owner and co-founder of Omni Wellness NYC, which is a center of health and holistic wellness. And if that's not enough, she's also the author of several books, including 14 Days, a Memoir of Love, Loss, and Quarantine Hell, and also Bringing Sunshine Back to My Mind, a story about overcoming trauma and finding wholeness, which is a fictional story that was inspired by her patients and work with complex trauma and its complicated implications on health. Momoko joins us via Skype from New York. Hi, Momoko.
Hi, thanks for having me on your show.
Thanks for being on the program with us. Again, as I said in that introduction, there's so much here. There's so much to work with as far as your background that I don't know where to begin. But let's talk about your book, 14 Days. Because, I mean, just the subtitle, A Memoir of Love, Loss, and Quarantine Hell. This is a real story for you in which you were going home to see your mom. Tell us the story and what made you decide that you wanted to write it as a book?
I wanted to write it as a book. Well, I've been a closet writer for a very, very long time. And during this mandated 2-week government mandated quarantine, I almost died while I was watching my mother pass away. And I realized at that moment of almost touching death that life was very short and that I wanted to overcome my fears of putting my writing out into the world. And so I decided to go for it. It was, it's a memoir. So it was obviously true to my own story. So nobody could, poo-hoo it, if that makes sense. So I felt like I was validated in my personal experience. It wasn't like a fiction that somebody could say, well, that doesn't sound right. So I think that's the reason. And I wanted to share with people that, we can all go through these very horrific experiences, and quarantine was something that we all shared universally as a world, and how that's affected all of us in I think, very deep ways.
It's interesting that you say, you found out at this experience that life is short, yet you yourself are a medical practitioner. And I guess it's one of those situations where we don't necessarily see the forest for the trees. We, in our jobs, can deal with other people and deal with what's going on in their lives, especially in your case as a medical practitioner, but not necessarily in your own life. And the realization of what you were going through at that time sort of brought it home to you.
Absolutely. I think that we all have eyes that look out and not look in. And I think that it's easy to focus on other people and not on ourselves. So this was an opportunity for me to just reflect on myself. I was forced to look at myself because I was surrounded by just four walls. There was nobody else in my room with me for these 2 weeks. So it was a lot of time for me to reflect.
We should set the stage because you're talking about the quarantine, and you were going home to see your mother, and this was in, I guess, Australia?
Yes, that's correct. Their borders were completely down, and in order to get back to Australia, you had to go through this 2-week-long quarantine in a hotel room with a guard outside your door, and the windows were bolted shut.
So you say you almost died during quarantine. Died from what?
So I almost had an anaphylactic reaction to some food that was given to me. And I've had anaphylaxis in the past, but I hadn't had a flare-up in quite some time. I think it was the combination of the stress and I was actually exposed to moldy green beans. And the mold, I'm highly allergic to mold, and it's quite a random thing to be exposed to mold in a hotel. But, that's kind of what happened.
Now, as I said, you're a medical practitioner, but you always emphasize, not only in your practice, but in your writing, that humor is the best medicine. So what was that experience going through that in writing your book that brought the humor out, even though it was a hellish situation for you?
So I can't say that much of it was very funny when I was going through it, but when I was reflecting on it, I tried to make it as humorous as possible. And, when I was going through it too, there were moments when I tried to make light of things. When I could chat with friends and send, funny videos back and forth. And, I was watching TV bloopers or something like that just to keep my mood buoyant so I wouldn't drop into despair, basically. So I try to use humor every single day whenever possible. I mean, of course, there's moments when you absolutely can't, the laughter's just not there. So, but whenever possible, I try to laugh because I think it's very good for your health.
Now, 14 Days was your first book. The one that we followed up with was called Bringing Sunshine Back to My Mind, which, as I mentioned in the introduction, is a fictional story, but it's based on some of your own patients. So, again, what made you write this particular story, and why in a fictionalized way?
So this book is mostly about sexual trauma, and 1 in 3 women approximately experience sexual trauma, and possibly even 1 in 4 men. And so it's a trauma that many people have experienced, and if they haven't experienced them themselves, then they'll definitely know somebody who has. And it's one of those traumas that it carries so much shame that most people actually don't talk about it much. And so I wanted to write something that people could read about and see themselves in the book, or maybe they witnessed somebody else go through it, but that person was unable to talk about it with them and they wanted to somehow help them. And I think that if you've experienced it or have know somebody else that's been going through something like that, to be able to read something and then to be able to relate to it, I think is very healing.
Okay, so you kind of answered the question of that I was going to ask, and that is, who were you writing the book for? And but since you said that now, I'm just wondering, were you concerned when you were starting to write the book that you were doing something that might be triggering?
Yes, so it is. It is quite triggering. It's not for everybody to read, so that definitely should be. Some people should consider it if they want to read it or not, because it can be quite triggering to read. So that's up to your own discretion. If it's quite explicit and very, very detailed, it's specifically for those people who want to go through a deeper exploration of these themes and healing on an emotional, physical, mental level. There's this fictional character's path of how she personally did it. But for some people, they might not be ready to read a book like this. It might be too triggering and re-traumatizing. So you have to decide if you're ready to read something like this.
I guess the important part is to at least know what you're getting into before you get into it, right?
Absolutely. I think so. And then sometimes, you think that you're ready to read something like that or experience something, and then you're in the middle of it and you think, uh-oh. And so you stop. You stop and you take a break. And, I've read some things too that were very, very difficult. And I actually, there was a memoir that I read quite some time ago, and I couldn't finish it. It was just so, painful for me to read that not that I could even relate to this woman's experience, but it was so much for me that I had to put it down. So, I understand that it's not good. Some people aren't going to be able to get through it.
You mentioned earlier that you were always interested in writing. Was this something that you always wanted to do as a career? Or did you gravitate toward medicine because it was something that you were really interested in, or something that your parents were really interested in you doing?
I was interested in medicine myself. My mother actually wanted me to become a professional dancer, which is kind of funny as an Asian mother to want your child to be a dancer. And I told her I want to be a doctor. And she was quite disappointed. It's quite the reverse, as you can imagine, and the opposite of what Asian parents probably would say. Most Asian parents would be quite happy that their child wanted to go to medical school, but not my mum. And so that was something that I had decided when I was quite young. I was probably around 14 years old when I decided I wanted to go to medical school. I was always very interested in medicine, physical health and emotional health, and also because my mother was quite ill when I was young. And watching her suffer, I think, probably had a lot to do with me picking a career in the medical field.
But as I said, you always wanted to be a writer as well. So when did that build up in you beyond just the dream of a childhood?
I started writing almost every day, probably about 10 years ago, and was just too shy. I had so much volume, just a tremendous amount of just volumes and volumes of chapters and of different stories. And it really took almost dying for me to get these stories out. So I had been seriously thinking about it, and it had just been a dream. But I had been taking classes, reading about writing, talking to people about it for probably, working on my craft for at least 10 years. Before that, I'd always enjoyed it, but I hadn't really taken it as seriously.
Well, we just have a few more minutes to go here, but I've got to mention the fact that you, as I said earlier, are the owner and co-founder of Omni Wellness NYC. For those who are in the New York area, what exactly is it that you offer? And tell us a little bit about Omni Wellness NYC.
So Omni Wellness is owned by Scott Anderson and I. We're very good friends. He's a chiropractor, and we have all sorts of different holistic practitioners. We have skincare, holistic skincare, acne specifically, and we have other chiropractors, Chinese medical practitioners, acupuncturists, herbalists, and massage therapists. And then we also network with a lot of other people who work in the building too. For example, we have other therapists, psychotherapists, as well as physical therapists in our building. So it's a pretty large group of practitioners that work together.
And for more information, people can go to the website to find out more about it, correct?
Yes, omniwellnessnyc.com.
omniwellnessnyc.com. And again, we should mention your books. It's 14 Days, a memoir of love, loss, and quarantine hell, and also Bringing Sunshine Back to My Mind, a story about overcoming trauma and finding wholeness. Momoko, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Thank you so much for your time.
Momoko Uno, owner and co-founder of Omni Wellness NYC and author of 14 Days, a memoir of love, loss, and quarantine hell, and also Bringing Sunshine Back to My Mind, a story about overcoming trauma and finding wholeness. You can go to my website at thestuffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0775, and you'll find the link to Momoko's website, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order her books directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestufffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestufffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Here's a brief word about our show and my book. If you become a regular Patreon patron of the Stuff File program, I'll give you an e-version of my book, Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. It's easy to do. Just go to patreon.com and become a patron to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. So, join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuff File program.
Coming to you from Canada, a place where fighting is frowned upon, unless it's on an ice rink. This is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. Now, the Stuff File presents Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy. It's radio that's out of this world.
Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy, is a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada and author of National Geographic's Backyard Guide to the Night Sky, and also National Geographic's Stargazer's Atlas, the ultimate guide to the night sky. And Andrew, we've had some spectacular astronomical shows to witness this year, what with the solar eclipse and the ongoing solar flares, but now we have a new show on the horizon, literally, in the sky, and it's star explosions?
That's right. We are actually going to witness a stellar explosion, a star that, what's really cool is actually exploded already 3,000 years ago. It's a star that's 3,000 light years away that is going to go nova. What that basically means is that it's a star that is going to have an explosion on its surface that will make it as bright as the North Star is visible to us. So we'll actually be able to see it with the naked eye. Even people within city limits, just with the naked eye, even with light pollution, will be able to see it with nothing, no telescope, no binoculars in the skies above us. And this is going to be particularly well placed for anyone across the northern hemisphere. Now, when is this going to happen? That's the big question. When? Scientists don't really know exactly to pin it down. We do know it's in the next few months. So between sometime now and September, there's at least an 85% chance that it will happen. This is based on scientists' work on observing the star. It goes through this explosion every 79, 80 years. So the last time it actually happened was in 1945, and it's supposed to happen again now. And it was observed then and 79, 80 years before that and before that. And it's a reoccurring explosion that happens on this star that's usually so faint you need a small telescope to see this star. But for a few brief days, sometime over the course of the next few months, it'll be something that everyone can enjoy.
Now, you mentioned that it's equivalent in view of what we normally see as the Northern Star, and maybe we could even toss in Venus as well, because that appears as a star, kind of as a planet. And I'm just curious to know, will there be anything different about what we see? Will there be a flash of light? Will there be an explosion? Or will it just be a constant light like the Northern Star is?
So the way we think is going to play out is that it's following along our predictions in terms of brightness right now. So what's happening is that there's it's undergoing a predicted dip in brightness right now, even becoming fainter than it usually is. And then it will suddenly brighten up. Basically, what's happening is on the surface of the star, a thermonuclear explosion is going to happen. It's like an atomic bomb is going off on the surface of the star. And within a matter of 3 hours, it will suddenly brighten up to become as bright as the North Star, so clearly visible as a bright star where there once wasn't in the sky. And that will happen. That brightness increase will happen in just 3 hours, and it'll stay that bright for, we think, for a few days, maybe as short as a couple of days. We're not really exactly sure, but for at least 48 hours, it should be as bright, and then it'll slowly fade back down, becoming a binocular object for something for, we think, another 2 to 3 weeks. And then after that, it'll be only visible through small backyard telescopes again.
Now, for those who do have small backyard telescopes like yourself, how impressive will it be to look at this through a telescope?
It'll appear like a very bright star through a telescope, probably have this twinkling effect associated with it. And it'll just be definitely something that you'll notice that isn't what it should be. In this part of the sky, it's actually filled with pretty faint stars. There's not that many bright stars where this is happening. It's in the constellation Corona Borealis, which is Latin for northern star. It looks like a U-shaped constellation, a group of 7 stars in the form of a U, and it's just going to have this added jewel to the crown in the sky, and it'll be taking the form of a very bright star where there once wasn't any.
And you mentioned the twinkling effect, and to be clear, the twinkling effect is not necessarily something that's happening with the star. It's the light coming through our atmosphere, correct?
Absolutely. It's because what happens is that stars are so far away that their beam of light is very, very thin. It's very sharp. And so it can penetrate through the atmosphere very clearly. And they don't regularly twinkle. But when they do get super bright, very, very bright stars, their beam of light is a little bit thicker and can actually, as it passes through the atmosphere of Earth, gets kind of blurred and scattered. And it's that scattering of the photons of light that causes it to twinkle. So that effect may come into play when we see this nova outburst.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned the time frame as to when this thing actually exploded. How many years ago? That time frame was?
Well, we're talking 79 to 80 years in between that it takes for this to gear up for another explosion. So the last time was in 1945.
Excellent. And that brings us to our next story, which is apparently the Webb telescope spotted the most distant galaxies ever seen. How far are they?
Yes. This is just mind-blowing because we're talking about a pair of galaxies that we're looking at that as they appear only 300 million years after the Big Bang. So we're looking back a predicted 13.5 billion light years away. That's how long, 13.5 billion years it's taken the light from these baby galaxies to reach us. These infant galaxies, there's 2 of them that the James Webb telescope was able to spy in the last few months, and it now breaks the record as being the most distant galaxies seen by humanity.
And how much did it break the record by?
By over 100 million years. It's really incredible. So we're what's crazy about this, Peter, is that when you look at it, it looks like a little blob, and most galaxies do look like little blobs through telescopes. But what's amazing is that it's kind of fun. It's kind of unstructured. The blob, you can tell that it's not really like modern galaxies, like what we see around the Milky Way, our home galaxy, what we see in the universe present today. It's a building block of what the galaxies will become as the universe matures. So in our view back in, not just distance-wise, but back in time in this view of this galaxy, we're seeing something of the building block of what we have today. So it's not shaped the way current galaxies are, and it's only a fraction of the size. While our Milky Way galaxy, which, by the way, our home galaxy is an average humdrum spiral galaxy, it spans about 100,000 light years across. This baby galaxy stretches only about 1,600 light years across. So it's very small compared to modern galaxies, yet it has all the telltale signs of what a galaxy are. It has dust, it has gas, it obviously is glowing from the light of the stars that are there. And in fact, there's also a very interesting, an unexpected discovery of oxygen that exists in this faint primordial galaxy. And that's very indicative to scientists that there were already stars that had lived and died, exploded, and threw out all this oxygen out into this baby galaxy's realm and has been incorporated into new generation of stars that are glowing there. So it's already showing that despite it being only 300 million years after the Big Bang, there's already been the first generation of stars that have lived and died to make this baby galaxy.
And when we talk about the Big Bang again, what time frame are we talking about? How far back?
We're talking 13.8 billion years ago. And this galaxy that we're seeing is at 13.5 billion years ago, just 300 years after the Big Bang.
Wow, that's amazing. And we're just about out of time, but I wanted to bring up one more point, and that is, since we talked about what the Webb telescope has discovered, let's not forget Hubble. Apparently it's still alive and kicking, and NASA has plans to make sure that it's alive and kicking until 2035?
Absolutely. So there was a lot of buzz in the last few months that Hubble may be being retired and may have to close down because it's lost one of the gyroscopes that's on board that helps point the telescope to different targets. The telescope has traditionally used 3 gyroscopes. It has a set of 6. And right now, they are down to 2 gyroscopes that are functioning. And so they had to rejig the software on board, create a workaround so that it can actually do scientific work using only 1 gyroscope. So they've managed to do that, and they've held the second gyroscope in reserve. So it's kind of mothballed for now, break in case of emergency, basically, for that second gyroscope. It needs these devices to be able to function properly, to do its amazing scientific work. And so they have one working, one on the sidelines, and they expect that this configuration will allow Hubble to keep producing science, keep working well into the early next decade. And then there's still hints of that it may actually be serviced again, potentially maybe by SpaceX. There's talk about hints about that and boosting its orbit because the orbit of the Hubble Space Telescope is being pulled down by the gravity of the Earth. And if nothing is done, if it isn't reboosted, eventually sometime the next decade in 2030s, it'll have a fiery return in the Earth's atmosphere. But for now, Hubble is safe.
Okay, so very quickly, just to wrap things up, as I said, they're hoping to keep it going until 2035. When was it launched, and how long was it supposed to be working for?
It was launched in the early 1990s, and you may remember in 1990 there was a big brouhaha. There was over 30 years ago that the original mirror was not ground or shaped properly, and they had to have an immediate servicing mission to give it basically corrective eyeglasses to be able to see clearly. Once that was done in 1991, the telescope has been producing amazing discoveries. It has literally rewritten the astronomy textbooks over the years of finding new types of astronomical objects and our understanding of how the universe works, basically, and really strange things, not studying things like black holes and dark matter and dark energy. The Hubble has really been a boon for science.
But what was the expected date that it was supposed to stop working? And basically, has it gone beyond that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, originally this was hoped to last for just a few handful of years, 3 to 5 years of working. But here we are. We're in 2024 from 1990. I mean, it's incredible. This thing is like the Energizer Bunny of telescopes.
Excellent. Andrew, thank you once again for being on the program with us.
My pleasure. Clear skies.
Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy. You can go to my website at thestuffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0775, and you'll find links to Andrew's site to get your own personal autographed copy of his books. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. And boys and girls, it's that moment you've all been waiting for. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the Strange Things Adults Do. The Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
After matching with a man on a dating app, an Iowa woman exchanged text with him before arranging to meet in person at her residence. Already, this is not a good idea. But anyway, when 18-year-old Sumaya Thomas got cold feet, she called 911 in a remarkably harebrained bid to avoid a real-life interaction. Thomas, who lives in an Iowa City suburb, called police to report that her abusive ex-boyfriend had shown up outside her residence and was sending her threats via Snapchat to hit, punch, kick, and stab her. Thomas claimed that she has known this man for 2 years and that she was pregnant with his baby. Officers responding to Thomas's residence encountered a male leaving the scene and began an in-depth investigation about the reports being made. The man, who was detained by police, explained that he began speaking with Thomas just over a week ago on a dating app and provided text messages that showed he was being honest and he really did just meet this female. After multiple interviews with police, Thomas admitted she had been lying, claiming she got cold feet on meeting him and no longer wanted to. She fabricated her tales of abuse because she didn't think officers would help, so she made up this call and the events that she described. According to police, after being read her rights, Thomas explained she pulled the 911 gambit because she didn't want the male here and she felt we wouldn't be able to do anything if she just called normally. She was arrested for placing a false 911 call and making a fake report of an indictable offense, both of which are misdemeanors. Now, why? Oh, why? Would you make a 911 call about a stalking, violent ex-boyfriend simply to get out of meeting a guy on a dating app that you invited to your house in the first place? Because you got cold feet? Well, one reason, and one reason only. You're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0775. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestuffile.com, and once again, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links on all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0775. Email me at peter@thestuffile.com. You could also find me on Facebook, Spoutable, Mastodon, and Blue Sky as PA Holder. Check us out on patreon.com, or you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including KDXRadio.com, TrueTalkRadio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, WLSLLP-FM in Dade City, Florida, KZZHLP-FM in Eureka, California, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been getting jiggy with Peter Anthony Holder and the Stuff File program, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. He's a bad mama jamma, and after he spends some chill time in his crib, he'll be back to get down with his bad self. Word up.